"Take your hands off the car and step back, ma'am." The command cut through the cold Washington morning before anyone asked her name, before anyone checked the black government SUV, before anyone noticed the small federal badge resting inside her open wallet. The woman standing near the curb did not shout. She did not reach. She only turned her head slowly toward Officer Blake Reynolds, rain dusting the shoulders of her dark coat, and said in a calm voice, "You are stopping the wrong person." That should have been enough to make him pause. It was not. Around them, traffic crawled past the Lincoln Memorial, headlights glowing pale through the drizzle, tourists slowing with phones half raised, the city moving like it had seen this kind of thing too many times to be surprised. Reynolds saw a black woman in plain clothes beside a vehicle he believed did not belong to her. He saw government plates and decided they were suspicious. He saw her silence and mistook it for fear. His partner, Officer Daniel Pierce, stood a few feet away near the cruiser, one hand resting near his radio, his eyes moving between the woman's face and the ID card Reynolds had barely glanced at before dismissing it. Something about her was wrong for the story Reynolds had already written in his head. She was too still. Too precise. Too unshaken. If this is your first time here, subscribe now, because stories like this remind us why dignity can stand taller than power, even when power carries a badge. The woman's name was Naomi Carter, though no one on that sidewalk understood the weight of it yet. To them, she was just another person being questioned under gray skies, just another figure framed by red and blue lights reflecting off wet pavement. But inside the locked leather folder on her passenger seat was a Pentagon clearance packet marked for a meeting less than 2 miles away. Inside her coat pocket was an old photograph of her father in uniform, the edges softened from years of being carried through deployments, funerals, promotions, and long nights when the country asked more from her than it ever thanked her for. Naomi had not come to Washington to make a scene. She had come from Walter Reed, where her mother had squeezed her hand that morning and told her not to skip breakfast, as if Naomi were still a girl leaving for school instead of a woman trusted in rooms where national decisions were made. Reynolds stepped closer, his jaw tight, his tone clipped. "Turn around." Naomi looked at the cuffs in his hand, then at his face. The metal caught the morning light for half a second, bright and cold. "Officer," she said, each word measured, "there is a verification number on that identification. Call it." Reynolds gave a humorless laugh, the kind meant for the crowd as much as for her. "I don't take instructions from people running fake credentials." Pierce shifted his weight. Naomi noticed. She always noticed the small things, the hesitation before a bad order, the breath before a lie, the silence of someone who knows the truth but hopes someone else will say it first. "Then follow your own procedure," she said. A bus hissed at the curb. Rain tapped softly against the cruiser roof. Somewhere behind them, a child asked his mother why the lady was being stopped, and the mother pulled him closer without answering. Naomi's eyes flicked toward the boy for one brief second, and something deeper than anger moved through her chest. Not fear. Not shame. Recognition. Reynolds reached for her wrist and guided her hands behind her with practiced efficiency, but Naomi did not resist. The cuffs closed with a clean metallic click, small enough to be swallowed by traffic, loud enough to change the air around them. The crowd went quiet. Pierce looked down. Reynolds straightened as if the moment had proved him right. Naomi lifted her chin, rain tracing a thin line along her cheek, and spoke so softly only the officers could hear. "You have about 60 seconds before this becomes bigger than you." Reynolds smirked, but the radio on Pierce's shoulder crackled once, then twice, and the sound that followed made both men turn. The radio crackle lasted less than a second, but it changed the rhythm of the street. Pierce touched the device on his shoulder and listened, his brows drawing together as dispatch asked for confirmation on the black federal SUV near Constitution Avenue. Reynolds glanced at him with irritation, as if even the radio had interrupted his performance. Naomi stood beside the cruiser with her hands secured behind her, the rain settling into the wool of her coat, the cold metal pressing against skin that had carried heavier things without complaint. She had learned stillness before she learned command. As a girl in Norfolk, Virginia, she had watched her father polish his dress shoes at the kitchen table every Sunday night, his movements slow and exact, his uniform hanging from the pantry door like a second body. He used to tell her that discipline was not the absence of emotion. It was choosing what deserved to see it. That lesson lived in her now, under the gray morning sky, while strangers measured her through camera lenses and whispers. She was not thinking about herself first. That was the part men like Reynolds never understood. She was thinking about the clearance packet on the passenger seat, the room waiting for her across the Potomac, the briefing that had been moved twice because the situation overseas could not wait for pride on a sidewalk. She was thinking about her mother at Walter Reed, thin fingers wrapped around a paper cup of hospital coffee, smiling through pain as she said, "Naomi, do not let them make you late." Even then, her mother had known the world had a habit of placing obstacles in front of black women and calling them procedures. Reynolds stepped into her line of sight. "You stay quiet unless I ask you something." Naomi looked at him, not above him, not through him, but directly at him, with the kind of calm that made insecure people feel accused. "I have answered every lawful question you asked." His mouth tightened. Pierce lowered his voice. "Blake, dispatch says the plate comes back Federal." Reynolds did not turn around. "A plate does not mean anything." Pierce swallowed, looking at the SUV again. The windshield wipers moved once, dragging a clean arc through the mist. On the dashboard, a temporary access placard sat where Naomi had placed it 15 minutes earlier after leaving the security checkpoint. Reynolds had seen it. He had simply chosen not to believe what contradicted the picture he wanted. Naomi shifted her shoulders slightly, not in resistance, only to ease the pressure. Her coat sleeve rode up just enough to reveal a narrow line of pale skin where her watch usually rested. She had removed it at the hospital because the clasp kept catching on her mother's blanket. That small absence bothered her more than the cuffs. It made the morning feel unfinished. A woman from the growing crowd called out, "She showed you identification." Reynolds snapped his head toward the voice. "Stand back." The woman stepped back, but she did not lower her phone. Naomi heard the tremor in that woman's breathing, the anger held carefully behind her teeth. She knew that sound. It was the sound of someone who had seen too much and still hoped one recording might matter. Pierce took a step closer to Reynolds and spoke more firmly. "We should verify the identification." Reynolds finally looked at him, eyes sharp. "You want to run this stop, or do you want to back me up?" Pierce froze. The question was not really a question. It was a test of loyalty, and everyone within 6 feet could feel it. Naomi turned her head slightly toward Pierce. "Officer Pierce," she said, using his name as if they were in a conference room instead of beside a patrol car, "the moment you know a thing is wrong, silence becomes a decision." Pierce blinked. The words landed quietly, but they landed. Reynolds gave a short laugh. "You hear that? Now she is giving moral lectures." Naomi did not answer. In her mind, she was back in a desert command center years earlier, fluorescent lights buzzing over maps, young soldiers waiting for her to speak after a mistake no one wanted to own. She had told them then what she believed now: truth does not become smaller because power refuses to look at it. The radio crackled again, clearer this time. Dispatch asked Pierce to repeat the name on the identification card. Reynolds reached into the cruiser, grabbed Naomi's wallet from the front seat where he had tossed it, and flipped it open with exaggerated impatience. For the first time, he actually read the full line printed beneath the seal. His thumb stopped moving. The rain kept falling. Traffic kept passing. Pierce leaned closer, and the color slowly drained from his face. Reynolds stared at the identification card as if the letters had rearranged themselves just to embarrass him. For the first time that morning, the sharp certainty in his face flickered. Pierce saw it. Naomi heard it in the small silence that followed, the kind of silence that opens when a man realizes the ground beneath him is not where he thought it was. The card carried a federal seal, a clearance stripe, and a name printed with military precision: Naomi Elaine Carter. Beneath it, in clean black type, was a rank Reynolds had not expected to see attached to the woman he had just dismissed. He closed the wallet too quickly, like hiding the words would erase them. "This could still be outdated," he said. His voice had lost its edge, but he tried to sharpen it again. Pierce looked at him. "The expiration date is next year." Reynolds shot him a warning look, but Pierce did not look away this time. The crowd had grown along the sidewalk, held back by distance and uncertainty rather than tape or command. A jogger had stopped beneath a bare sycamore tree. 2 tourists stood near the memorial steps, their ponchos shining with rain. A vendor selling coffee from a cart kept his hands wrapped around a stack of paper cups, watching without blinking. Naomi felt every set of eyes, but she did not let them pull her apart. Public humiliation had a way of turning a person into a symbol before they had time to remain human. She refused to let that happen inside herself. She focused on details. The smell of wet asphalt. The faint diesel breath of a bus at the curb. The soft ache in her wrists. The red light from the cruiser washing across the side of her SUV and then fading, again and again, like a warning no one had learned to read. Reynolds stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Who exactly are you supposed to be?" Naomi's gaze settled on him. "You have my identification in your hand. I asked you a question. And I gave you the lawful way to answer it." Pierce cleared his throat. "Dispatch is waiting for the name." Reynolds ignored him. That was when Naomi understood him fully. This had never been about confusion. Confusion asks for proof. Pride rejects it. Reynolds had built his authority on being obeyed quickly, and Naomi had committed the unforgivable offense of remaining composed while he expected fear. He wanted her to plead, to shrink, to become the version of herself that made his suspicion feel justified. She gave him nothing but stillness. 10 minutes earlier, when he first pulled behind her near the curb, he had approached with one hand lifted and a tone already hardened. He claimed the vehicle had been reported suspicious because it paused too long beside a restricted traffic lane. Naomi had explained that she was waiting for an escort clearance confirmation from a federal liaison, then handed over her license, her federal credentials, and the temporary Pentagon access placard. Reynolds had barely looked at the documents before asking why a woman like her was driving a government vehicle alone. The words had been casual enough for denial, heavy enough to reveal him. Naomi had met that kind of sentence before. Not always loud. Not always wearing hatred openly. Sometimes prejudice wore a polite voice and called itself caution. Sometimes it smiled while asking for one more form of proof. Pierce had been quiet then, young enough to be uncomfortable, trained enough to obey the older officer beside him. Naomi had watched his eyes dip to the credentials, then lift to Reynolds, waiting for permission to believe what was already in front of him. That was why she had said his name earlier. Not to shame him. To wake him. Now, with the radio hissing against the rain, Pierce reached for his shoulder mic again. "Dispatch, this is Officer Pierce. Stand by for full identification." Reynolds turned sharply. "Do not." Pierce stopped with his thumb on the button. The two men looked at each other, and the entire sidewalk seemed to lean into the space between them. Naomi drew one slow breath. She could feel the morning slipping away, minute by minute, but her voice stayed steady. "Officer Reynolds, every second you delay verification is a choice you will have to explain." His jaw moved once. "Are you threatening me?" "No," Naomi said. "I am giving you the last clean exit you are going to get." A gust of wind carried rain under the collar of her coat. Somewhere nearby, the child spoke again, softer this time, asking if the lady was in trouble. His mother whispered something Naomi could not hear. Reynolds heard the child too. His face hardened, not with confidence, but with the fear of losing control in front of witnesses. He grabbed the radio from Pierce's hand and pressed the button himself. "Dispatch, run the name Naomi Elaine Carter." He paused, eyes fixed on Naomi as though daring the truth to disappoint him. "Claims federal status." The answer did not come right away. The waiting stretched thin and bright. Then dispatch replied, asking him to repeat the rank listed on the credential. Reynolds looked down at the card again. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Pierce leaned in, read it over his shoulder, and whispered the words Reynolds could not bring himself to say. "Brigadier General." The radio went silent for one breath. Then a different voice entered the channel, calm, senior, and unmistakably official. "All units, hold position. Pentagon liaison is coming on the line." The words Pentagon liaison moved through the air like a door opening in a wall Reynolds had believed was solid. He kept the radio near his mouth, but his thumb loosened around it. Pierce stood beside him, no longer trying to look certain, no longer pretending the morning was ordinary. Naomi watched both men without expression, though inside her chest the clock was louder than the rain. Every minute mattered now. Across the river, a secure conference room was being filled with people who did not wait casually. Maps would be on screens. Phones would be sealed outside. Names would be spoken that never appeared in newspapers. And yet here she stood on a public sidewalk, restrained beside a cruiser because one officer had chosen suspicion before procedure. The new voice came through again, crisp and controlled. "This is Colonel Marcus Ellison, Office of the Joint Staff. Confirm you have detained Brigadier General Naomi Elaine Carter." Reynolds swallowed. "We are verifying identity at this time." "That was not my question." The line seemed to cut the sound from the street. Even the crowd quieted. Pierce looked at Naomi, then at the cuffs, then back at Reynolds. "Sir," Pierce said quietly, "we need to remove those." Reynolds ignored him, but his face had changed. The heat of his arrogance had cooled into something smaller and more dangerous, panic searching for a place to hide. "Colonel," Reynolds said, forcing a professional tone, "we initiated a lawful stop based on suspicious circumstances." Naomi closed her eyes for half a second. Suspicious circumstances. The phrase had followed people like her for generations, changing uniforms, changing streets, changing excuses, but always carrying the same old weight. A black woman near power. A black woman inside authority. A black woman not asking permission to exist in a place someone else considered guarded. When she opened her eyes, the Lincoln Memorial stood pale through the rain, Abraham Lincoln seated in stone behind columns, looking out over a country still learning the meaning of its promises. Colonel Ellison answered slowly. "Officer, General Carter is scheduled for a classified briefing at the Pentagon in under 30 minutes. Her vehicle, access placard, and identification were transmitted through federal channels this morning. You were instructed by dispatch to verify." Why was she restrained before confirmation? Reynolds looked toward the crowd as if searching for a version of events he could borrow. Phones were still raised. The coffee vendor had stopped pretending to stack cups. The mother with the child held him close, but her eyes stayed on Naomi. Pierce stepped forward, voice low but clear. "Officer Reynolds, I am going to unlock her now." Reynolds turned on him. "Stand down." Pierce did not move back. His hand trembled once, then steadied. No, it was a small word, almost swallowed by the rain, but it landed harder than shouting. Naomi turned her head slightly toward him. Not approval. Not forgiveness. Acknowledgement. There was a difference. Reynolds stared at his partner as if betrayal had walked up wearing a familiar badge. "You want to ruin yourself over this?" Pierce's face tightened. "I think we already crossed a line." Naomi heard the boy behind them whisper, "Mom, is she a soldier?" The mother answered softly, "Yes, baby. I think she is." Something in Naomi's throat tightened, but she kept her voice even. "Officer Pierce, my wrists first, then my documents placed on the hood where everyone can see them." Pierce nodded. Reynolds opened his mouth, but Colonel Ellison's voice came through again, colder now. "Do exactly as General Carter instructs." Pierce took the key from his belt and moved behind her with careful respect. He did not rush. He did not apologize yet. Perhaps he knew an apology spoken too early could become another way of asking the injured person to carry the weight. The cuffs opened with a soft metallic release. Blood moved back into Naomi's hands in a warm ache. She brought her arms forward slowly, flexing her fingers once, then smoothing the sleeves of her coat as if she had just stepped out of a meeting instead of a public mistake. Reynolds watched the movement, and for the first time, he seemed to understand that her calm had never been weakness. It had been command. Pierce placed her wallet, federal identification, and access placard on the wet hood of the cruiser. Raindrops gathered over the plastic seal. Colonel Ellison spoke one final time through the radio. "Remain on scene. Internal affairs and federal security are en route." Reynolds went still. The siren lights kept turning across his face, red, blue, like judgment arriving one color at a time. Naomi flexed her fingers once more, not because she wanted anyone to notice the marks the cuffs had left, but because feeling had returned slowly, like blood remembering its duty. The rain had softened into a fine mist, thin enough to blur the marble steps of the memorial and sharp enough to make every siren light shine brighter against the wet street. Reynolds stood near the cruiser, his radio lowered now, his confidence leaking out of him in visible pieces. For several minutes, he had filled the sidewalk with command. Now he had no command left, only the sound of approaching consequences moving closer from both directions. Pierce stayed beside the hood, guarding Naomi's documents from the rain. With his own body angled slightly over them, as if protecting them now could undo the moments when he had failed to protect her. Naomi noticed that too. She noticed everything. A black sedan with federal plates arrived first, pulling to the curb without drama. 2 security officers stepped out in dark coats, followed by a tall woman with silver hair pinned neatly at the back of her head. She carried no visible weapon, raised no voice, and still the entire street seemed to make room for her. "General Carter," she said, walking straight to Naomi. "I am Deputy Director Helen Shaw, Pentagon Force Protection Agency. Are you injured?" Naomi could have said yes in a dozen ways. She could have lifted her wrists. She could have pointed to the crowd, to the phones, to the child who had watched her dignity tested in public. Instead, she said, "I am able to proceed." Shaw's eyes flicked to her hands, then to Reynolds, and the temperature around them seemed to drop. "That was not what I asked." Naomi held her gaze for a moment, then answered with the truth stripped of decoration. "I was restrained without proper verification. I was delayed from a classified briefing. I was spoken to as if my credentials became suspicious the moment they belonged to me." The words did not rise. They did not need to. Shaw turned toward Reynolds. "Officer, who authorized the restraint?" Reynolds straightened, reaching for the old shape of authority. "Deputy Director, we had reason to believe there was a possible misuse of government plates." "What reason?" He hesitated. It was small, but everyone saw it. Pierce looked down. The crowd seemed to hold its breath. Reynolds said, "The vehicle was parked near a restricted approach." Shaw looked at the access placard on the hood. The placard cleared that approach. "We had not confirmed that at the time." "Did you attempt confirmation before placing her in cuffs?" Reynolds swallowed. "We were in the process." Pierce raised his head. His voice came out rough, but clear. "No, ma'am. We did not complete verification first." Reynolds turned toward him with disbelief, but Pierce kept going, each word costing him and freeing him at the same time. "General Carter requested that we call the number on her identification. I told Officer Reynolds the plate came back federal. He continued the detention." The street went quiet in a way that felt almost physical. Naomi looked at Pierce, and this time she saw not courage fully formed, but the beginning of it, late and imperfect, standing in the rain with nowhere left to hide. Shaw nodded once to one of the federal officers, who began photographing the documents, the cruiser position, the body cameras, the access placard, the license plate. Another car arrived, this one from the local department. A captain stepped out, coat half-buttoned, face already tense with the knowledge that the story had outrun him. Phones in the crowd followed him as he approached. "General Carter," he said, voice careful, "I apologize for the inconvenience." Naomi turned to him slowly. "Captain, inconvenience is missing a flight." This was something else. The sentence landed with no anger in it, which made it heavier. The captain's eyes dropped for a second. Reynolds opened his mouth, then closed it. He had finally understood that the badge on his chest could not protect him from the record created by his own choices. Shaw checked her watch. "General, your briefing team is waiting. A replacement escort is ready." Naomi glanced toward the boy and his mother. The child was still watching her, wide-eyed, trying to understand how someone could be treated as powerless one moment and called general the next. Naomi walked toward him, stopping a respectful distance away. "Young man," she said gently, "remember this. You should not need to know someone's title before you treat them with respect." The boy nodded. His mother's eyes shone, but she smiled. Naomi returned to the sedan. Behind her, Reynolds was asked for his body camera, his duty weapon, and his badge. No one shouted. No one celebrated. The rain did the speaking, tapping softly against metal, pavement, and glass, while a career built on careless power began to come apart in silence. The federal sedan pulled away from the curb with Naomi in the back seat, but the silence inside it felt louder than the street she had left behind. "Deputy Director." Shaw sat beside her, speaking into a secure phone in a low, controlled voice, updating someone on the delay, confirming that General Carter was mobile, confirming that the briefing could hold for 7 more minutes. Naomi looked out through the rain-streaked glass as Washington slid past in muted grays and wet stone. The memorial faded behind them. The cruiser lights became small, then smaller, until they disappeared in the side mirror like a bad dream that still knew her name. She placed both hands on her lap, palms down, fingers straight, and studied the faint red bands around her wrists. They were not deep. They would fade before lunch, maybe before the day was over. But some marks did not need to stay visible to remain real. The leather seat was warm beneath her, the air inside the sedan smelled faintly of coffee and clean upholstery, and for the first time since Reynolds had stepped toward her, Naomi allowed herself one long breath. Not a sigh. Not a collapse. Just breath returning to its rightful place. Shaw ended the call and looked at her. "We can have a medical officer meet you at the Pentagon." Naomi shook her head. "After the briefing." "General." The word was gentle, but firm. Naomi turned from the window. Shaw's face carried the kind of concern that did not perform itself. "I have been delayed. I will not be diminished." Shaw held her gaze, then nodded slowly, understanding the difference. The sedan crossed toward the secured route, tires whispering over wet pavement. Outside, a flag snapped in the wind above a federal building, its colors dulled by clouds but still moving, still insisting. Naomi thought of her father again, the way he had once stood in their small kitchen after coming home from a ceremony where someone had mistaken him for a valet. He had taken off his jacket, hung it carefully, and smiled at her mother as if nothing had happened. But later, when young Naomi found him alone on the back porch, he told her the truth. "Baby girl," he had said, looking out at the dark yard, "some people will only see your skin until your excellence scares them. Do not let that make excellence your apology." She had carried that sentence through officer training, through rooms where men interrupted her, through deployments where doubt traveled faster than orders, through promotions celebrated with polite smiles and private resentment. Yet somehow, the sidewalk had reached a place inside her rank could not armor. The boy's face. That was what stayed. Not Reynolds. Not the cuffs. The boy. His confusion. His mother's silence. The lesson he almost learned before she corrected it. If this moment touched your heart, remember Naomi not because she was powerful, but because she stayed human when humiliation tried to make her smaller. At the Pentagon security entrance, the sedan slowed. A uniformed officer stepped forward, saw Naomi in the back, and immediately straightened. The gate opened without question. That simple movement, smooth and respectful, struck her harder than she expected. How strange, she thought, that the same country could make one door difficult and another door automatic, depending on who stood guard and what they chose to see. The car stopped near a covered entrance. Before Shaw could open her door, Naomi reached for the handle herself. Rain blew sideways under the canopy. Several officers were waiting, including Colonel Marcus Ellison, tall, composed, his expression held tight with restrained anger. "General Carter," he said. "I am sorry." Naomi stepped out, smoothing her coat. "For the delay or for what caused it?" Ellison paused. "Both." She nodded once. That was enough for now. As they walked inside, the polished floor reflected ceiling lights beneath her shoes, each step steady, each echo measured. People turned as she passed, some already aware, some only sensing that something had happened before she arrived. Naomi kept her hands at her sides. She did not hide her wrists. She did not display them either. She simply carried them, the way she had carried every hard thing, without surrendering the right to feel its weight. The secure briefing room fell silent the moment Naomi entered, not because she demanded attention, but because her absence had already become part of the room. A long table stretched beneath recessed lights, polished so cleanly it reflected the blue glow of classified screens along the wall. Nameplates sat in precise rows. Folders were closed. Coffee cups waited untouched. 12 people turned toward her, some in uniform, some in civilian suits, all carrying the look of professionals who understood that a delay at this level was rarely simple. Naomi walked to her seat without rushing. Colonel Ellison pulled out the chair, but she did not sit immediately. Her eyes moved once across the room, reading faces the way she had learned to read weather, terrain, and silence. Concern. Anger. Curiosity. One man near the far end looked down at her wrists and then away too quickly. Naomi saw that too. She placed her leather folder on the table, opened it, and removed the clearance packet as if the morning had unfolded exactly according to plan. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, voice even, "we are behind schedule. Let us not fall further behind by pretending that did not happen." No one moved. Then Admiral Teresa Quinn, seated at the head of the table, leaned forward. Her silver stars caught the light. "General Carter, before we proceed, I need to ask directly. Are you fit to brief?" Naomi looked at the map glowing on the wall, then back at the Admiral. "Yes, ma'am." "Are you certain?" "I have been underestimated more times than I have been unprepared." The sentence was not loud, but it settled over the table with weight. Admiral Quinn held her gaze for a moment, then gave a single nod. "Proceed." Naomi touched the screen control. The wall map shifted, bringing up a coastal region marked with shipping routes, weather overlays, and red indicators blinking across several narrow corridors. The room changed with it. Whatever had happened outside did not disappear, but duty took its place beside it. Naomi briefed without notes for the first 6 minutes. Her voice moved cleanly through the facts: 3 disrupted communications windows, 2 intercepted signals, a humanitarian convoy waiting in uncertain waters, and a decision point that had been moved forward by nearly 8 hours. She explained risk not like someone reciting data, but like someone who knew the cost of every line on the screen. As she spoke, the room leaned in. The men who had looked away from her wrists now listened with his pen frozen above paper. A civilian analyst adjusted his glasses and whispered something to the person beside him. Admiral Quinn did not interrupt once. Naomi's hands remained visible on the table, the red marks faint but unmistakable beneath the bright white lights. She did not hide them because the room needed to understand something without her making a speech of it. A nation could trust her judgment in crisis and still fail to recognize her dignity on a sidewalk. Halfway through the briefing, an aide entered quietly and handed Colonel Ellison a tablet. Ellison read it, and his expression tightened. Admiral Quinn noticed. "Colonel." Ellison looked to Naomi first, asking permission without words. She gave the smallest nod. "The department has received preliminary reports from the scene," he said. "Body camera footage confirms General Carter provided valid credentials at the start of the stop. Dispatch also confirms the officers were advised to verify before escalation." The room absorbed that in silence. Naomi did not look down. Admiral Quinn's face hardened with controlled disbelief. "Names?" Ellison answered, "Officer Blake Reynolds and Officer Daniel Pierce." A deputy secretary at the table exhaled through his nose. "Local department?" "Yes, sir." "Metropolitan jurisdiction, already notified." "Internal affairs is on scene." "Federal review has been opened." Naomi turned back to the screen. "Then the record will do what records are meant to do. Now, if I may continue, the convoy window closes in 42 minutes. That was the moment the room fully understood her. Not just her rank. Not just her title. Her discipline. Her refusal to let personal humiliation endanger people who had nothing to do with it. Admiral Quinn sat back slowly, something like respect deepening into certainty. "Continue, General." Naomi did. For the next 20 minutes, she guided the room through a decision that would protect lives no one in the building would ever meet. Her recommendation was precise, measured, and accepted unanimously. When the final authorization was given, the tension in the room broke not with applause, but with breath. People gathered their papers, screens dimmed, chairs moved softly against carpet. Admiral Quinn remained seated until the others began leaving. Then she stood and approached Naomi privately, though not out of earshot of everyone. "What happened this morning will not be buried," she said. Naomi closed her folder. "I am not asking for special treatment." "No," Quinn replied. "You are asking for the standard everyone claims already exists." Naomi looked toward the dark screen where the map had been. For a second, she saw not routes or signals, but the boy on the sidewalk watching a lesson he should never have had to learn. "Then make sure the standard reaches the street," she said. Behind her, Colonel Ellison's phone buzzed again. He read the update, then looked up. "General, Officer Reynolds has been relieved of duty pending investigation. Officer Pierce has submitted a statement confirming the sequence of events." Naomi's expression did not change, but something in the room did. The truth had moved from witness to record, from record to consequence. Outside, rain still traced the Pentagon windows in thin silver lines. Inside, power had finally turned its face toward accountability. By late afternoon, the rain had thinned into a pale mist over Arlington, leaving the Pentagon windows streaked with silver and the streets beyond them shining like dark glass. Naomi stood alone in a quiet corridor outside Admiral Quinn's office, holding her phone in one hand and her father's photograph in the other. The briefing was over. The convoy decision had been made. People were moving again, doors opening and closing, shoes crossing polished floors, voices returning to business as if the morning had already folded itself into a file. But Naomi knew better. Some moments did not end when the paperwork began. They stayed in the body, in the small ache around the wrists, in the memory of strangers watching, in the sound of a child asking why respect had to wait for proof. Her phone buzzed. Walter Reed. She answered immediately. Her mother's voice came through thin but steady, wrapped in hospital noise and the soft beeping of machines. "Did you eat?" Naomi closed her eyes. And almost smiled. "Not yet." Naomi Elaine Carter. "I know." A pause. Her mother heard what Naomi had not said. Mothers often did. "What happened?" Naomi looked down at the red lines on her skin, lighter now but still there. "A reminder," she said softly. "Of what?" Naomi watched a young enlisted aide pass at the end of the hall carrying a stack of folders nearly to his chin. He saw her, recognized the rank, and straightened so quickly one folder almost slipped. She gave him a small nod, and he continued, taller than before. "That some people salute the uniform and still miss the person inside it," Naomi said. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, with the tired strength of a woman who had survived more than she ever explained, she said, "Then make them see the person." The call ended a minute later, but the words remained. "Make them see the person." Naomi slipped the photograph back into her coat pocket just as Colonel Ellison approached. His expression was careful, the way people look when they are carrying news that belongs partly to justice and partly to pain. "General, Officer Pierce requested permission to speak with you before he gives his formal statement downtown. I told them it was your decision." Naomi looked through the corridor glass toward the gray sky. "Where is he?" "Security reception." She waited a breath. "Bring him to conference room 3. Ellison did not question it. 10 minutes later, Pierce stood inside the small room with his hat in his hands, his uniform damp at the shoulders, his face stripped of the morning's uncertainty. He looked younger away from Reynolds, as if obedience had been aging him. Naomi stood by the window, not seated behind the table, not using rank as a wall. "General Carter," Pierce said, voice low. "I am sorry." Naomi turned. "For what part?" The question landed gently, which made it harder. Pierce looked at the floor, then forced himself to meet her eyes. "For seeing the identification and waiting. For knowing something was wrong and letting him keep going. For caring more about backing my partner than protecting a citizen." His throat moved. "For making you stand there while I decided whether truth was worth discomfort." Naomi studied him. Outside the window, rainwater slid down the glass in crooked lines, separating and joining again. "Do you know why I said your silence was a decision?" Pierce nodded once. "Because it was." "No," Naomi said. "Because you still had time to choose differently." He looked up. That was not absolution. It was responsibility offered without cruelty. Pierce's eyes reddened, but he did not ask her to comfort him. That mattered. "I gave the statement," he said. "All of it. I did not soften it." Naomi folded her hands in front of her. "Good. Officer Reynolds is blaming the call volume, the weather, the crowd. He says the situation moved too fast." Naomi's face remained calm. "Bias often moves faster than procedure. That is why procedure exists." Pierce absorbed the words like they had weight in his pockets. "I know this does not fix it. It does not. But I wanted you to hear it from me before the report did." Naomi walked to the table and picked up a plain paper cup of water someone had left untouched. She did not drink from it. She only held it, feeling its fragile warmth. Officer Pierce, your apology is not the ending. It is evidence that you understand where the beginning should have been. Pierce nodded, slowly. Yes, ma'am. Naomi looked at him then, not as the men who failed, but as the men who might let that failure teach him before he became another Reynolds. When you return to duty, if you return, remember the boy on that sidewalk. Pierce's face tightened. I saw him. Then understand what he saw. He saw a badge. Decide first and think second. Spend the rest of your career proving that is not what the badge has to mean. Pierce held his hat tighter. I will. Naomi walked past him toward the door, then stopped. Do not promise me. Practice it. She left him standing in the quiet room with that sentence, and for the first time all day, the silence did not feel like humiliation. It felt like a chance. By the time Naomi left the Pentagon, the rain had stopped, and Washington had entered that quiet hour when the sky turns the color of steel and every wet surface holds a little piece of light. A black government vehicle waited. Near the entrance, engine running softly, its windows reflecting the long lines of the building behind her. Colonel Ellison walked at her side, holding a thin folder that contained the first formal notice from the department. Officer Blake Reynolds had been suspended pending termination review. His body camera footage, radio traffic, and prior complaint history were now part of a federal civil rights inquiry. Officer Daniel Pierce remained under investigation too, but his full statement had changed the shape of the record. He had told the truth while it could still cost him something. That did not erase what happened, but it mattered. Justice, Naomi knew, was not always thunder. Sometimes it arrived as a signature on a form, a badge placed on a desk, a report that could no longer be rewritten by the loudest person in the room. General, Ellison said as they reached the vehicle, Admiral Quinn asked me to tell you the department is recommending a joint review on field verification procedures with local agencies. Naomi looked across the road where the last rainwater slipped along the curb in narrow silver streams. Make sure the training does not begin with rank, she said. Ellison understood immediately. Where should it begin? Naomi turned toward him. With humanity. He nodded, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The city moved around them, steady and unaware, commuters heading home, security guards changing shifts, flags lifting in the damp wind. Naomi reached into her coat pocket and touched the old photograph of her father. She imagined him on the porch in Norfolk, his uniform jacket folded across his arm, telling her that excellence should never be an apology. She had believed him then. She believed him now. But the day had taught her something else too. A person should not have to be excellent to be treated with care. A person should not need a title, a clearance, a uniform, or a call from someone powerful to be seen as worthy of dignity. Before she stepped into the vehicle, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a short video sent through a public contact line, the mother from the sidewalk, her son standing beside her in a dry jacket, holding a small hand-drawn picture of a woman in a dark coat under red and blue lights. Beneath the drawing, in uneven letters, he had written, "Respect first." Naomi stared at the screen longer than she expected. The ache in her wrists had faded almost completely, but that message reached a softer place, one rank had never touched. She typed only 2 words back, "Thank you." Then she placed the phone against her heart for one breath before putting it away. At the same hour, across town, Reynolds sat in a conference room at headquarters with his badge and duty weapon sealed in evidence envelopes on the table before him. No crowd watched him now. No siren lights made him look powerful. There was only fluorescent light, a recorder blinking red, and questions he could not command into silence. When asked why he ignored the verification number, he looked down at his hands and had no answer that sounded like procedure. Pierce sat in another room, telling the same story again, this time without hiding behind loyalty. By morning, the footage would be reviewed by supervisors, attorneys, and federal officials. By the end of the week, policy meetings would begin. By the end of the month, the department would announce new requirements for federal credential verification, bias intervention, and partner accountability. None of it would undo the moment on the sidewalk. But maybe, somewhere, it would stop the next one. Naomi arrived at Walter Reed just after dusk. Her mother was awake, watching the muted television glow against the wall. "You finally ate?" she asked. Naomi smiled and sat beside the bed, taking her hand carefully. "Not yet." Her mother sighed, but her thumb brushed gently over Naomi's wrist, pausing where the skin was still faintly marked. She did not ask again what happened. She already knew enough. Naomi leaned back in the chair and looked out the hospital window. Beyond the glass, the flag in the courtyard moved in the evening wind, quiet but unbowed. For the first time all day, Naomi let herself be only a daughter. Not a general. Not a symbol. Not proof of anyone's mistake. Just a woman holding her mother's hand while the city learned, slowly and imperfectly, that kindness is not weakness, dignity is not permission, and respect should never wait for a title. So tell me, if you had been standing on that sidewalk, would you have stayed silent, recorded the truth, or stepped forward before the call came?